All right, well, let's go ahead and get going, shall we? Welcome aboard, everybody, to Coaching Others to Be Better Business Communicators, key strategies for providing one-on-one feedback for long-term results. That is a mouthful, which means we better get busy, right? So introducing the Turpin team. I'm Greg. I'm the EVP of Learning and Business Development here. Dale Ludwig is our president and founder.
Hey, everybody.
And we have Kevin Vogelsang with us. He is our operations manager. And today he is going to be performing the role of host. What that means is he's going to take care of us, make sure that we have a favorable video and audio experience. He also will be watching chat and hand raising for us. So if you have something to add to the conversation or a question, we want you to do that. And if we don't notice that it's happening, Kevin certainly will. And he's going to go off video because he might get a little active taking care of us if there happens to be a problem, and that might become distracting to the rest of us. So he's going to be off video for the next hour. Some of you have worked with us before and you know the work that we do. Others have no idea the work we do. So let me just lay a foundation. We are communication consultants and coaches, and we work with individual contributors, managers, leaders, and executives. So people at all levels of organizations across all different types of industries. We work with them, helping them be more effective presenters, meeting facilitators, and trainers. And over the years, Dale and I have co-authored a handful of books and contributed to a handful of others. We're going to talk today a little bit about the orderly conversation. So what exactly is an orderly conversation? Well, it's any sort of business communication that is planned in advance, but needs to take place in a flexible conversational tone. So think meetings, presentations, training sessions. Right now, we are having what feels hopefully like an orderly conversation. Dale and Kevin and I have put a lot of thought into how today's session is going to go. So that's the orderly part, but right now it's the conversation. And one of the things you might be thinking right now is, well, Greg, you've been talking. That sounds more like a monologue, which is true, but we do invite you to join us in the conversation, and we will be flexible and we will go wherever the conversation leads. By the way, when you see me looking over here, it's just because I have two monitors and I've moved your videos over here, and I'm just checking in to make sure that you are still with me. Joni, thank you for nodding. I appreciate that. That makes me feel good, right? But to you, it looks like I'm looking off into the distance. So I need to balance a little bit more here into the camera rather than here. And the metaphor that we use for that actually is right now I'm driving my car. I'm looking out the windshield, keeping us all safe. But every once in a while, I need to check my mirrors. So that's what I'm doing. All right, so an orderly conversation. Let's move on. When we put this particular webinar together, we targeted it to a very specific audience, and that is to business people who have direct reports reporting to them. So leaders, managers, we work with a lot of sales managers, aspiring managers, and mentors. But if you don't fit into one of those buckets, don't worry, because everything that we talk about today, you will eventually be able to apply when you do become a manager of people. I want to share a little bit of research with you from ATD, that's the Association for Talent Development. They have a magazine called TD, and back in March, they published this report from Quantum Workplace, 2021 Employee Turnover Trends. As you can see at the top of the screen, disengaged employees are flight risks, and workers want growth, flexibility, and communication. It goes on to say that there are 6 major reasons that employees leave their employer. Number 1 being poor leadership communication. They go on to say that 35%, I would say only 35% of exiting employees said that they experienced transparent communication throughout all levels of the organization. That is staggering to me. They go on to say that number 5 reason employees leave is because of inadequate employee and leadership feedback. Employees are 2 times more likely to be highly engaged when they agree that their manager regularly gives them feedback to improve their performance. So feedback is so important. But they go on to say that employees who regularly receive constructive feedback are also less likely to be searching for other jobs and 2 times more likely to say they'll be working at their current company in the next year. In the land of the great resignation that we are in right now, this is staggering. And it really points at why this is so important to learn how to give constructive employee feedback. So let's get to it. Our agenda for the next hour and not about 50 minutes, mutually beneficial relationships. So we're going to focus in on developing relationships, establishing connection and credibility, and then we'll get to roll up our sleeves and really dig into coaching others in the moment. So Dale, you are going to take it from here.
Yes, I am. Okay, let me bring up my slides. I assume that made it to your screen?
It did.
Okay, great. All right, so as you can see, the first bullet point here is mutually beneficial relationships and what the success factors are in a coaching or feedback environment. And the first thing I want to do is talk about some of the challenges you all brought up on the assessment that we set out when you registered, because I thought you had really good things to say. And I'm going to go through a couple of slides here. This one, challenges you face. You're having a hard conversation and you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. These are all, this slide, I tried to organize in terms of challenges one faces as a coach. The next one is challenging coachees, the people that you are coaching. So you don't want to have a hard conversation or hurt people's feelings, frustration from others. And when you are feeling frustration with others, you can come off as being upset with them, which is a very subtle, interesting comment to make. I don't want to sound too critical or superior, communicating what needs to be said, but doing so in an informative, constructive way. So it's about being, it's a little bit about being, not appearing critical and superior, being clear, wanting to be kind and constructive. What a bunch of nice people we're working with here. Follow-up and accountability. This is a new idea, empowering the team to act on the feedback that they've been given. So in other words, here's your feedback. Now go change your behavior. That's a step that often is not taken. And then finally, let me move my videos out of the way so I can read this bullet. Providing feedback that will be taken as positive and constructive. So it's about setting the right tone while also being efficient with the feedback that you're offering. If we look at the next slide, someone said you must have the open door first. In other words, the people that are being coached, that are getting the feedback, need to be open to it. When they're not, they can also often be defensive. Getting people to change behavior is tough. That came up a bit on the last slide, but how do you do that? How do you help them make that step easier? I find it difficult to engage in constructive feedback with employees who might perceive as disrespectful, which is an interesting way to look at things too. If you've got an employee who you already are thinking, wait a minute, there's an attitude here or something, how do you give that person feedback? Some people hear but do not comprehend. Helping others understand why when they aren't as clear as they think they are. In other words, how do you, if you get pushback on feedback, what do you do? If you say, well, you appeared XYZ, and they say, no, I didn't, then what's the step that you take to solve that? When they don't have the desire, again, to be a better communicator, and difficult conversations when you're disappointed with someone's behavior or performance. So this gets a little bit into what you bring into the coaching session as well, because you're coming together as individuals and you're establishing yourself as a person who is appropriate to deliver this feedback. And so many times you're dealing with difficult dynamics between the two of you. So I think if we look at what needs to happen from a real fundamental level, we can say that two things need to happen. You need to have mutual trust. There needs to be an open door, as somebody said in that assessment question, between the two of you so that you trust each other, and you also have to have clear goals. Now, as a coach or as a person giving the feedback, you need to have empathy for them, which if they have an attitude, it's hard to have empathy for them. So I would just want to call that out. And the employee must have the desire to improve. And the question is, what do you do with that employee? You can't just get rid of them. So what do you do? Is there a way to open that person up a bit to the feedback that you're there to give? And how do you break that barrier? And I want to start now by talking about the goals that you may have during these feedback and coaching sessions. So the question you want to ask the people that you're coaching is, how do you want to be perceived by the people you work with and for? It's also important to do that for yourself. Here's a what do you call these things, Greg? Word cloud? Is that what it is? The word just left my brain. Thank you,
Yes.
Nicole, for nodding. I was like, I was going to say word cloud. But no, that's not what it is. It's something else. Anyway, here's a bunch of words on this slide, and they describe how I want to be perceived by the people that I'm working with. So take a minute, if you would, to drop into chat how you want to be perceived. As the person coaching someone else, how do you want to be perceived? And let's just take a look at what those are. Approachable, open, listening, understanding, caring, encourager. Oh, those are all good, Tony. Transparent, kind, helpful, authentic, genuine, honest, clear, great, understanding, kind and caring, competent, fair. Yes, Chad, good.
We have a lot of really good people in the
I know
room
we do.
today.
We don't
Look at
even
this.
I am the boss. Nobody put that in here. Listen to me.
Of course, it's rare that someone says a jerk or something like that, right?
That's true.
That did
But
happen one time, though. That was a strange sort of thing.
Yeah, it was a strange one. We kind of got past that one.
If we have time, we'll tell that story.
Okay. Man of integrity. Good. Sincere, fair. Okay. Let me make that go away. Because I would want, do I have fair on here? Great listener.
You do not, but we could.
I do not. We could add that because I think that whole feeling of I feel kind of bad giving you this feedback I experience, and it's important to find a way to be clear and fair and helpful, while at the same time giving somebody feedback that they may not be really excited to receive. So I think that's an issue that will sort of be peppered throughout the rest of the webinar today. Let me get that next slide up. What we've just done then, we're going to fill in the arrows on this feedback model as the morning or the afternoon or evening goes forward. But I just want to point out that we have already taken the first step here. You want to ask the people that you're coaching how they want to be perceived. That way you have baseline, and all of the feedback that you give can be based on that. You are doing X, that's not making you appear open, if that was one of their goals. So I think that this is a step that is often skipped or ignored, and you just sort of make assumptions about how people want to come across, but it really narrows your focus as a person delivering feedback to that person's issues. And you'll find that it's really helpful to take that step. Greg, I believe this goes back to you now. Is that right?
I don't think so.
Oh, it doesn't?
It doesn't.
Shoot.
I'm happy to cover for you, but
no, I remember now where we're going. That was just the introduction to that idea. Okay, let me bring this slide back up. Okay, so that's an intro to that slide. We will return to it. Right now, I want to talk about establishing connections and credibility and showing up and being appropriate for the situation. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever received unwelcome or inappropriate feedback? And if so, what made it problematic for you? Because I know I have, and I can talk about mine, but I'd rather hear from you all. If you want to drop that in chat, that'd be great. Or if you just want to speak up, that's fine too. We're a fairly small group. I was told you are not as good as you think you are.
ouch.
Whoa.
Talk about inappropriate. Oh, man.
When it is given in emotion or in front of a group. I was told I was going rogue. Being given feedback without justification of facts to back it up. Very good. When it's given without all the information, yes, that's true. We have a story about that as well, Greg. Maybe we can get to that one.
Yeah. Actually, we're a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, Dale, so I will. Dale and I were working with a group of folks. They were an intact team of trainers, and our buyer, who some of them reported to, some didn't, had said, it had given us some background information that we assumed was true based on their observations of this team of people. And when I mimicked back to them what the buyer had said, they were like, that isn't even a little bit true. She's never even seen us working. It completely threw me under the bus, and it was inappropriate, and it put my credibility and Dale's credibility
Mm-hmm.
in peril, at risk. It was a terrible situation we found ourselves in.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one here. I was told I was being arrogant for being tenacious. Stacy says, I had an employee complain that I was picking on her because I wasn't coaching anyone else on the team. She thought that I was being unfair, that she was the only one underperforming. Oh, okay. These are interesting. I think
Yeah.
that you need to consider, obviously you need to consider what you say to folks, but it's all about, and that goal setting thing is part of this. It's all about setting the stage for the feedback and making sure that you are not just judging immediately what people are doing in a negative way or even in a positive way, that you have a foundation for it, that there's a reason that you're saying these things. And that's many times what makes feedback really inappropriate. Or if you don't respect the person that you're getting feedback from because they're not doing what they're asking you to do, that's another issue too in many situations. Okay, good. Let's go on to the next slide. Whoops. I am having, what's up with our technology today, Greg?
I don't know, but it was a miracle that the two of us got into this Zoom room as early as we did, because my computer was absolutely refusing today.
And nobody mentioned Mercury. Okay, feedback must come from a credible source. Just to wrap up that discussion, as a coach, you should show up both emotionally and physically. It means being the kind of communicator that you want them to be, and not saying they have to be just like you, but you want to make sure that you are really communicating effectively, fairly, smoothly, in an engaged sort of way. And so I want to talk about that a little bit on the following slides. What do we mean? What do we mean when we say show up appropriately? It means that as a coach, you are curious and you listen really well. You're present and you're engaged. You are not distracted. You appear to be in that moment right now with that person. You're self-aware. You're ready and able to give the feedback, and you have an appropriate level of energy. So let's talk a little bit more about how that actually happens. And the concept of engagement is fundamental to the work that we do, because if we go back to the idea of an orderly conversation, to be in a conversation, you must be engaged. You've got to be, your head needs to be where it should be, and you need to be connected to the people you're talking to. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, when you are engaged, you're able to think on your feet. And that's what coaching is about. You've got to be in that moment and deliver the feedback appropriately. So you're here and now, you're in the moment, self-aware, in control, you're feeling comfortable. You know instinctively what to do and say as an everyday conversation, and you easily read facial expressions and body language. So when you think about being the coach, you want these things to happen, but this is also what you're coaching others to do. So there's going to be that divide all the way through this webinar where we say, okay, this is how you should come across and this is how they should come across. It's really the same thing, but you do it in different ways, and it's finding what those different ways are that's really crucial. So if we talk about really fundamental skills, bottom line, engagement skills, pausing and breathing, eye contact to connect and observe. So pausing and breathing, you need to do that yourself when you're coaching, because you got to think, what's the best way to respond to this person? They, when you're coaching them to be better communicators, also need to pause. So you might find out that, oh, you know what, your issue seems to be you're thinking too fast, you're talking too fast, slow it down. Take the time to think when you're in the moment, when you're interacting with whoever you're interacting with. And the other side, eye contact. Obviously, in a face-to-face setting, eye contact is really important. It helps you observe, it helps you connect, it gives you a sense of the feedback that you're getting from that other person so that you can respond to that. So when you look at, excuse me, let's go back to this model, and Greg is going to pick it up from at this point and go forward,
Yeah.
so that we can fill in these blanks as we move around this circle.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we are placing the work that we're talking about into a communication event. Your job as the coach is to observe this communication event. Let's define it, the communication event. It could be a presentation, it could be a meeting, it could be a one-on-one. Whatever it is, you are observing the person in their work environment having some sort of a conversation. So let's tell a quick story here, and this will get us into this particular type of coaching situation. It's called a ride-along. If any of you have ever worked in B2B sales, you know exactly what a ride-along is, but some of the people here may not know. So let's say that these two individuals are work for a dentist supply company, and they are salespeople. Edgar is our salesperson who has decided that he will visit 6 different dentist locations in this whatever geographic location he's in, and he will be talking with dentists or maybe the managers of the dentist office trying to sell dental equipment. We've got Kate here, who is his manager. So her job is to observe Edgar while he is in these sales conversations. She will not be part of the sales conversation necessarily, but she'll observe and then provide feedback or coaching for Edgar as they are driving to the next location for the next sales meeting. And this will just repeat throughout the day. So we've got our goals. So Kate has asked Edgar, how do you want to be perceived? And that morning he said, professional, expert, their go-to guy, solution-oriented, and in tune with them. So Edgar goes in for his first sales conversation. That's the communication event. Now I'm going to unpack the rest of the feedback model, and then I will dig into each step as we move forward. So when they get back into the car, the first step is for Kate to ask Edgar, how did that go? So the self-assessment. She will then listen. She will provide her own observation. Then she will prioritize everything, because you have to be careful of piling too much on to the coachee. She'll make the recommendation, and then she'll tie it back to the goals. So the self-assessment, let's say that the conversation happened, they're back in the car, they're driving to location number 2. The first question that Kate should ask is about the feelings. How did he feel that went? And while he is answering, her job is to be curious, reserve judgment, assume positive intent on his part, listen well and listen for nuance, because it's not just sometimes what is said, but what's underneath, and you all know that. You have to wait to respond, but you might want to probe to learn more before you get into the next step. What you are really doing here is you're getting a sense of their self-awareness. So let's say that Edgar goes, that was awesome. And Kate's thinking, that wasn't awesome. You know that there's a disconnect there, right? So Edgar isn't as self-aware as we would hope that he would be. On the other hand, he might think that was absolutely terrible, that he crashed and burned, but maybe Kate sees some positive things that happened. So you really have to get a really good gauge for where is their head. So let's say that Edgar says, I think that went well, but I did interrupt the buyer that one time. Okay, from that little nugget right there, we know that there's a little bit of self-awareness around the interruption, but he does have the sense that the conversation went well. But Kate is thinking the following. Yeah, he did interrupt. He also seemed nervous and disengaged. He missed some cues and he spoke quickly. Okay, so now she's thinking all of these things. It's time for her to provide that observation. So she might say, oh, by the way, you can only comment on what you've observed. Remember, she said he seemed nervous, but he didn't confirm his nervousness. So we don't know for sure if the quick speaking pace and the missing cues was tied to nervousness or not. So you can only observe on what you saw, what you heard, or what you noticed. So let's say she says this. I noticed that interruption too. I also noticed that you didn't look at him very often and you were speaking pretty fast. And I don't think you noticed when he was shaking his head no about the additional software option when you brought it up. He might say, oh, you're right. I didn't notice that. Okay, now we've got all of these things floating around. We need to prioritize. The reason you need to prioritize is because you want to avoid piling too much on or overwhelming the person. And if you have ever been given a whole bushel basket full of feedback at one time, you know how unhelpful that is. So Kate
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, could you go back up to that slide you just had up? I want to connect this back to what folks said.
Oh, yeah.
With asking that question. If someone has said to you, oh, what was it? You seemed arrogant. I think that was the adjective that was used. What that coach has done is, first of all, make assumptions about, make the judgment based on what was observed, not talking about behaviors, but assigning a name to it, giving it describing it in such a way that that is arrogant, rather than saying, well, you seemed a little disconnected or a little impatient at times. Those things are more observable. But there's also the fact that they're jumping from communication event to prioritization, to making that, to making a recommendation, as bad as it might be, to just say you were arrogant. So the whole process for coaches, I find, when we're helping them, and this happens in our workshops all the time, Chad, I'm sure you remember this, is that you got to get other people talking. You've got to get them talking, because when they do, they're going to solve so many problems for you, because you'll, as Greg said, you might find out that they are or are not self-aware, and that opens the door for you to start delivering some specific feedback. It's not, and that's how you keep the emotion out, and that's how you keep the emotion from you and the emotion from them. That's how you make it practical and actionable for them. Sorry to interrupt, Greg. I know you're going to say this stuff, but
no, I'm glad that you did. And it gave me a moment to think back to something that Nicole had put into chat, which was, she was told, you're not as good as you think you are. How does that person know that? Like, right? Without any sort of self-assessment, asking you, how did you think that that went? And if you say, well, that was great, you still, that coach still can't tell you you're not as great as you think you are, because it doesn't have anything actionable attached to it, right? So he or she may have been thinking that, but as a coach, those words should never escape the mouth. Yikes.
Right. That's what you say to a sibling that you're annoyed with. I mean, I'm sure I said that to my siblings. No, probably they said it to me.
I was going to say, Dale, having met some of your family, I'm thinking that it's the reverse of that. But anyway, getting back into the car, Kate has some things she needs to figure out. She's thinking, okay, lack of eye contact. And I know through my own experience that leads to missed cues, which we saw. He also was interrupting and speaking fast. Now I need to prioritize. I think I'm going to go after the lack of eye contact, because if we get that nailed down, everything else might just fall into place. So now it's time for her to make the recommendation. And remember, you want them to be successful, and that you want them to know that you want them to be successful. So make what you recommend achievable and actionable. So here she goes. She'll go on to say, it's important that you be able to really see them and notice their facial expressions and body language. And on this next visit, I'm going to be watching for your eye contact. And he says, you know, I've been told that before, that I seem to be in my head when I get a little bit nervous. Okay, he just gave us some key information. He was in fact nervous. Yay, we've got something else to work with a little bit later. She goes on to say that that's typical from what I've seen from other people. Okay, we've got some agreement going here. This is good. Now, the final step in this feedback model is to tie it back to the goal, so you give ownership of this over to them. So it's about connecting dots. This is important for you because this will help you be perceived as, you said you want to be concise, so therefore, it's using phrases like that. So here she goes. Better eye contact will allow you to be more aware of their needs. And this is especially important because you said you want to be in tune with them and their go-to guy. If you're not aware of their needs, you can't do that, right? So he is now in full agreement. So when he goes into that next conversation, this is the one thing to be focusing on. And that brings us to the handout that we have. We just walked you through what was a very successful coaching conversation. They don't always go that smoothly, but we wanted to give you a picture of what that can look like when it goes well. Now, this handout will be available to you later. We're going to give it to you as a link in chat, and we're also going to send you an email later today that will have this handout and some other resources in it as well.
And another thing, sorry.
Yeah.
The feedback that we just observed, that made up little thing, the assumption was made that Edgar could do it. So you always want to make sure that you go in with that frame of mind. This person is capable of improving and capable of doing a good, taking the next step with their communication. Because without that, the coaching that you give takes on, what is it? It's reflected in the coaching that you give, because you might tend to judge too much, or you might tend to want to give up on somebody, but don't do that. Because we always assume when we go into workshops, it's one of the fundamental things that we teach the people that do the coaching, the video coaching for us, is that person can do this. You got to find a way to help them. And
And
if
it might
that
take
is,
a few tries, right?
oh yeah,
I mean, with Edgar, he has 6 meetings today. He might get the eye contact right and start to understand what that feels like
right.
the very next meeting, but it may take all day, and that's
Oh
okay.
yeah. And it may take much longer than that as well. You never know. But your job is to get them with each coaching session, just to get them to the next step. And that can be a very, very small step, and that's okay, because eventually things will build on each other. Because I think it's fundamental to get to the basic issues. As I said before, when I was talking about eye contact and why it's important, and everybody knows it's important, but it's also a really fundamental skill that is affected in huge ways by nervousness, by discomfort, by feeling threatened, by feeling put off by a buyer in the Edgar situation. So it's boiling it down to absolutely the most fundamental thing, then building back up from there.
Yep. So the situation that we just walked you through was a very specific sales situation, but this model works for all types of communication events. So it might be HR folks helping new managers conduct performance reviews. Man, that first time you conduct a performance review, that is a terrifying experience, right? But imagine how much easier it would be if they had this model to work with. Post-project check-ins, managers asking their managers for help with a situation, customer support people asking managers for help with a sticky situation, presenters asking managers for help after a bumbled presentation. You can start to see that this is useful in all different situations. So we want to stop talking and see what are your thoughts or what are your questions around this feedback model before we move on.
I think it's very helpful. I like, if it could go that way, that would be great, but it has a lot of points that are helpful to keep in mind, and even to have written down. I'm glad there will be a handout, because I think it's sort of ideal, that things could go smoothly and you could really listen and be able to take those steps to improve, to help improve that conversation.
Yeah. Someone
Emerald,
asked, I'm sorry, Jill, go ahead.
Emerald says, what if a person you're coaching is defensive? And Stacy says, will we be talking about direct reports who think they are good communicators but are actually not? Yes.
Let's take Stacy's point first.
Okay.
Dale and I and the rest of the folks here at Turpin Communication, we have an advantage that you all don't have. Well, we have 2 advantages, actually. One is that we focus exclusively on helping people be better communicators. So we've all been doing this for a really long time. And we have a lot of wisdom built up across all of our experiences, but also we are a third party. And when we come into a workshop situation to work with communicators, or even in private one-on-one coaching with executives, we always record them delivering whatever message it is they have, and we watch that back immediately afterwards. There's nothing like being able to grow your self-awareness because when you're watching video, because it doesn't lie. Right. And so we really have an advantage over a manager in a ride-along situation, or just a manager in general. And if you are able to use the video recording process, you have to be extra sensitive, because nobody likes the way they look or the way they sound on video. So you really have to let them air it out, like, oh my God, I can't believe I sound that way, or does my face really function that way? We need to get that out of the way first too, right? But the video doesn't lie. So if someone says, I've been told that I need to be concise, but I think I am concise, and then they watch themselves not being concise, that learning point has been made. They now know how frustrating it can be to have to listen to them. So that's pretty cool.
As far as the defensiveness goes, I think that's a tough one, Emerald, but it's, first of all, when you're dealing with somebody who's really defensive, assume that that person is really insecure and really threatened by what's happening. And so your job is to take away the threat. Now, don't get upset, don't get angry, don't say quit being defensive, but try to instead give feedback that's really specific, actionable, positive, and try to lead them and try to build trust between the two of you. so that they know that you are there to help and that you are aware of everything they're doing well, and you're just trying to help them take the next step. You're on their side. And that takes a lot of time sometimes, and many times, as Greg just said, the defensiveness goes away when video is involved. But if it's your observation that's driving the coaching and there is no video, then you've got to be really, really specific and really listen to that person when they're talking about how they're feeling about the process. It's tough, but it can be done.
Yeah. Oh, you know what, Dale? I was going to get back into the deck, and I just had a thought. We're a couple minutes ahead of schedule, so I'm gonna follow my instinct here.
Go for it.
This was many years ago. Dale and I were with a group of very young fashion designers. We were way too old to be in that room, and very uncool compared
And really
to how
not cool enough. That was the main thing.
Anyway, we were working with this group of designers, so you can imagine how they were dressed, how they presented themselves. But there was one individual who did not look or act like the rest of them. And I was in my very first coaching session with her, and I asked her, how did you say you wanted to be perceived when we were in the other room? And she says, I don't care. That had never happened to me before, to get that response, I don't care. And my brain was going, oh man, what do I do with this? And she went on to say, I don't have the need to fit in. But what she didn't understand is how toxic her attitude was to the entire group. And it was almost as if I felt like I needed to go to HR and say, this woman may be doing good design work, but I think she's having a negative effect across the rest of the team. And sometimes we have to have those difficult conversations with our buyers or the folks in HR or whatever. But one of these things was definitely not like the other, and she had no sense of that it was happening or that she even cared. So in that case, maybe she needs to find an organization where she fits in a little bit better. And those are difficult conversations to have, for sure. So let's get at resonance and efficiency. Dale?
You're going to drive this for me?
Yeah, I sure will.
Okay, if you know our work, you know that we talk about a default approach. Goes back again to the orderly conversation. There are different approaches to coaching sessions, to all sorts of conversations that take place at work. So we divide folks up into writers and improvisers, which this slide is going to show in just a second. But in terms of if they're preparing for a sales call, for example, they might be like a writer. Greg, if you could zero in on that side of the slide, please. Sure. Writers thrive with organization and preparation. They are always going to be ready. They're always going to have every I dotted and T crossed. They often feel there's not enough time to prepare. They want structure and predictability. They want their interactions to go as planned. They're naturally thorough, careful, detailed, accurate. All of those things are really good skills. Problem with the writer is they can be inflexible and strict during delivery. And we find this with, if you're on a call, if you're doing a ride along and you're noticing that somebody is just going according to plan and missing cues along the way, they might be a writer. They might not be interested in changing the course of the conversation in spite of what the buyer might be saying. On the other side, we have people that are more comfortable with the conversation half of the orderly conversation. We call them improvisers because they thrive with the connection to listeners. Many salespeople, for example, are improvisers. They may delay prep until the last minute. They want to be spontaneous and engaged. They're responsive and unafraid to make last minute changes. And all those things are good as well. All the delaying prep is usually not a great idea. But what happens with improvisers is that they can lose focus and be confusing during delivery. So improvisers obviously need to work more toward the writer side, bring a little more structure to their interactions. Writers need to loosen up a little bit and let the conversation take place. Now, you're going to have a default as a coach, and the people you're coaching are going to have a default. So the first step is to figure out what your default is, which is why Greg is going to bring up this next slide. In the handout you'll get later, there's a document we use to assess your default approach. It's really simple. The directions are clear. But once you've identified what your default is, there are pathways in this document. And there it is. This is just one page for writers, for example. This is how writers respond to preparation. And it's sort of a flow, thought flow, starting with your basic assumptions, what that can lead to, adjustments there on the left, how the adjustments will feel, and that's really important. And then finally leading to success down at the bottom. So I think what this allows you to do is understand your preferences first. How do you approach communication? And to help someone else improve, what do they need to do to improve their communication? And on the next slide, we have the coaching dynamics that can take place. If you are a writer and the person you're coaching is a writer, that's fine. You probably think the same way. You probably have the same approach. Challenge, though, is that both of you might want to tie things up a little too tightly during an interaction and loosen it up a little bit. Moving on, we've got writers and improvisers. This is a good and a bad thing. This can be a really good thing because if you are the improviser and the person is a writer, you can guide them to loosen up a bit, you'll recognize that they're not very loose, not very flexible, then you'll be able to guide them to be so. If the opposite is true, if you're a writer and they're an improviser, you can do the same. The last combination is improviser, and it could be a dangerous combination because their structure tends to go away, and sometimes the point is lost when you have an improviser coaching an improviser. So you want to make sure, if that's the case, that you're aware of what the dynamic could be. I want to talk a little bit more about that middle one, the improviser-writer one, because if you have somebody that you're really struggling with, that's just nothing seems to click in the coaching, it may be because you have the opposite defaults. We ask people this all the time, who's your most difficult report? And they'll usually describe someone who's the opposite default approach. So be aware of that and realize the strengths that that person brings to it, and that your preferences, your approach may not always be theirs. Then that's okay. You can coach them in a way that allows them to be themselves without being too much themselves. You can help take a step in the right direction with them.
Go
ahead.
I want to comment that Kelly says in chat, I think I'm a right provisor. Actually, Kelly, we all are, because this is not black and white. There's a lot of gray in between here. The idea is to figure out, how am I wired? How are they wired? And what does that mean for how I can approach? Because we all have characteristics of both. Very few people are at the extreme.
Exactly.
So let's go back to Edgar and Kate. We've got the second or maybe third communication event. So they're back in the car. Kate's thinking, well, the eye contact thing has been getting better, but his meetings start out chaotic, and I think he confuses people. Now we're going to introduce you to another tool. So if your direct reports are, the beginning of their meetings are really messy, this framing tool will help you help them. So you can see that the image of the frame is an introduction, body, and conclusion. But if we can agree that any sort of business communication event has got to feel like a conversation, we need more than just that structure, because it's too tightly connected to tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, right? There has to be listening and connecting dots and zigging and zagging. So when you have an effective introduction to the meeting, what you're doing is you're providing direction, purpose, context, and giving people a reason to participate. In other words, we're answering the question, what are we doing? And why are we doing it? And if you've ever sat in somebody's meeting and you had no idea what you're doing or why you're doing it, it's because, and you all have, I can see that recognition on some video faces there. It's because it wasn't framed up appropriately. So in this particular webinar, we don't have the time to go into this tool, but in some of our other webinars, we do. Regardless, we are going to give you access to this framing strategy worksheet, which will lead you down the path of how to frame up a conversation, and then you can apply that with your direct reports. And that gets us to coaching others in the moment. So we introduced you to the coaching model, the feedback model, and we introduced you to some tools. So one of them was the sense of an orderly conversation. So in other words, if somebody is too tied to their plan, we know what we can do, maybe introduce them to this notion of an orderly conversation. Or if they're just so no structure at all, again, getting them to understand the orderly conversation might be a good tool. Helping them understand their default approach, meaning too much on the orderly side, writers, too much on the conversational side, improvisers. This might be a good tool to use. Also, we talked about engagement. What does it mean to be clicked in? How does it feel? So we think on our feet, and there were those two skills, eye contact and pausing that help us get there. And then there's also this framing tool that helps us put structure around the beginning of the meeting. So those are the tools that we introduced you to. Now it's story time. Let's look at scenario number 1. This is Tomas. Tomas is a terrific coder. He's been with the company since the scrappy startup days of your growing high-tech company that serves the healthcare industry. He was recently promoted to your team, which focuses on customer engagement. In his new role, he's often asked to join virtual customer support calls to walk users through some of the trickier features of the software. So he went from being a terrific coder, now he has to talk people through how to use the software. As he's doing this, you've noticed that he's all over the place when talking people through the software. He speaks very fast and bounces from topic to topic. In the end, he tends to cause more confusion than he alleviates. Okay. Now you're regretting having asked him to speak at the upcoming user conference. You need to find a way to help him get focused and slow down, but how? So again, taking a look at the tools and the feedback model that we introduced you to, what might we do to help Tomas? What tools might we use, or any other ideas you might have? And let's do this verbally. So just take yourself off mute. Chad.
He's got to frame the conversation for sure.
Because he's all over the place.
He's all over the place.
Yep. Any other ideas?
Use the feedback model.
Definitely use the feedback model, yeah. Because you've had the opportunity to actually observe repeatedly, so that's good. Nicole, was that you that said that?
Yes.
Okay. Let's look at another scenario. They're going to get more tricky as we move forward here. You work for a property insurance company and manage a group of underwriters. Christine here has been identified as a high potential employee, and you've started giving her stretch assignments. Good for you. There's a nationwide rollout of a new underwriting policies and toolkits, and you are in charge of the training that will be delivered many times at your field offices across the country. You've asked Christine to be one of your co-facilitators as one of her stretch assignments. Last week at the dry run, where the whole training team got together to work through the content, you noticed that she had all of her sections memorized, which resulted in lifeless delivery. She was extremely nervous, and when she messed up, she had a hard time recovering. Not being a trainer yourself, you're not sure what to do. So again, here are those tools. How might we help Christine?
Try to get her to be more of an improviser?
She's definitely a writer, and we know that because she scripted herself out, and that caused nervousness when she got fumbled up. So working through those pathways that Dale mentioned, there might be some recommendations in there.
I would definitely do kind of a post-mortem with her and say, what do you think went well? What do you think didn't, and just make sure that there's some self-awareness there. I mean, this is hard for me because I am a trainer, but that's one of the things that I'm constantly telling people is we're just having a conversation, and everybody, even if you are a writer, you can have a conversation. Sometimes that helps with the nervousness and the perfectionism. But I think I'd start with knowing how self-aware they were about it.
Yeah, Kelly, that reminds me, we were with a client either last week or the week before. As you know, time gets weird working virtually, but we were face to face. And this one particular guy, he was quite young, but he had a pretty powerful position. And he had been told, and this is based on his schooling, that he needed to script everything out. But he said, it never works. I never, ever stick to it. And I always feel like a failure. So I said, okay, here's the deal. I want you to not prepare that in that way. Just go into your next meeting with an agenda and let's just see how it goes. And he came back to me and he said, it was brilliant. He said, my life has been changed. So a lot of times just having a tiny conversation to help people rewire their brains can have a huge impact.
That's a good example of the bad advice that sometimes you have to work around when you're helping somebody with their communication, because that guy was told something that was probably an attempt to get him a little more structured, sort of like the frame does, but it is never a good idea to script it out because it's a waste of time and people rarely use it unless you are a writer like the last, what was that last person's name?
Christine.
Christine was. I thought the story you're going to tell there was about the woman who was incredibly nervous because she thought she had to be perfect. And she got better right away when we said, you don't have to be perfect. That's okay. You don't have to follow that script. You can just talk.
Well, I think one of the
fine.
And one of the advantages, Dale, that you and I have is that we are incredibly imperfect, right? And when we're working with people, they see that, but you can be imperfect and have huge impact at the same time, right? And I think that a lot of people really tie their professionalism to this sense of I have to do everything just right. And it's just simply not true. So let's get at scenario number 3. As the EVP of sales for a Fortune 500 food manufacturing company, you have hundreds of sales teams across the globe. You're proud of the sales training your team created a few years ago, but you're noticing something that you didn't see coming. The newer salespeople simply aren't cutting it. So you brought some of your best sales managers together to discuss what's going on, and it became clear that it all boiled down to the lack of communication skills. Grocery chains are not taking advantage of special promotions because the salespeople aren't communicating the value. It is as simple as that. The question now is what to do about it. Any thoughts?
Maybe give them a reason to participate, a reason to share that information, how it will benefit them.
Okay, so leaning into benefits. This is actually a trick question, to be honest with you, because you're working with an enormous number of people here. You can imagine this company, it probably has thousands of salespeople, at least multiples of hundreds. So maybe in this case, what you do is you work with the managers. You get the managers kind of like what we're doing right now, bring them up to speed on how to coach others, and then each of them can work with their teams. So sorry to throw a trick question in there, but we actually do this quite often because budgets being what budgets are, a lot of times you just simply don't have the resources to work with people who are actually, doing the sales.
I think I'm going to interrupt because Emerald has a really good comment in chat.
Oh, great.
Often those who are fresh to the subject matter tend to be writers. Absolutely true. How do you coach them to be confident enough to do more improvisation since their depth of knowledge might not support improvising? Do you attend the meeting and step in when needed? I would say possibly yes. You attend the meeting and step in when needed. Let them know that that's what you might do and why you might do it. But maybe you can get them to accept the fact that they don't have to know everything. And you can always, because many times people new to a job think if they don't know the answer to a question, they're failing. And of course they're not. They just have to get comfortable managing an interaction with somebody where they say, I'll find out for you and get back to you. But
they might also not know what effective looks like, because if they've never observed somebody else be effective in a loose conversation, they might not even know that that's a possibility. So by modeling that behavior, in other words, stepping in to help, might actually be a really good idea, as long as the person doesn't feel as if they've been thrown under the bus.
Exactly.
Or right. Yeah. All right, that brings us to all of the resources that we introduced you today. We're going to give you access in chat for some downloads. Again, they will also be available to you in an email that we'll send you a little bit later. Now, for those of you who know us, you know that we do a couple webinars almost every single month. We have one called Leadership Communication in the Virtual World. It's 90 minutes long, and we do a pretty deep dive into executive presence and professional branding. And we also do some demos of that framing tool, because that is a huge leadership thing. So if you're interested, that might be something to come to. And of course, we're doing this one as well. Now, I said that we are doing monthlies. That's actually not quite true. We're taking June off because we are super busy here at Turpin Communication in June, but we will be back in July for those 2 webinars. So we're going to leave you with our very last best practice. And this is not about coaching others. This is just about being respectful of the people that you work with. End your meetings early. They have to go to the bathroom. They have to go to the refrigerator before they get into the next one, right? So don't torture them by keeping them too late. So if the need arises for you to improve the presentation skills or meeting skills or even training skills of the people that you work with, we're hoping that it's our phone number that you call or our email that you click, or connect with us on LinkedIn, because we really enjoy what we do and we love to work with you. And you've tasted a little bit of the Kool-Aid, as they say. So I am going to stop sharing, take us to gallery view. It was a pleasure having all of you today. Thank you so much. And Kelly Knowles, you are one of our biggest fans. Thank you for being around every once in a while. Always good to see your smiling face. Now, if there's something that we did not get to today that you wish we would have, we are happy to stick around and talk. Otherwise, see you later. Thanks a lot for joining us
Thanks
today.
a lot.
And thanks,
you,
Kevin,
Chad.
for taking care of us today.